I was halfway through finalizing the design for the Baxter Center, a sleek, modern marvel that would undoubtedly be the highlight of my architectural career, when my phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. Normally, I'd ignore it. Work always came first, but this was different. The message was from Clara. "Baby's here. Room 304, St. Vincent's. Can't wait for you to meet our little girl. Love you." For a moment, I just stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. Our baby was here. My baby. 9 months of anticipation, late-night nursery painting, endless baby name debates, all leading to this. I pushed back from my desk, grabbing my coat and calling out to Marcus, my colleague and closest friend. "The baby's here. I gotta go." Marcus's grin stretched wide as he leaned back in his chair. "What are you waiting for? Go be a dad. I'll handle the Baxter meeting." "Thanks, man," I said, already heading for the door. I didn't even care that I was leaving my blueprints scattered across my desk. Nothing mattered more than meeting my daughter. On the drive to the hospital, I couldn't help but think about everything Clara and I had been through to get to this point. The fertility treatments, the long nights wondering if this moment would ever come, and then the sheer joy when we found out she was pregnant. This was it. Everything I'd ever wanted, waiting for me in room 304. The parking lot at St. Vincent's was packed, but luck seemed to be on my side. I found a spot near the entrance. I grabbed the small stuffed elephant from the passenger seat, the one Clara and I had picked out months ago. It was soft and gray, with floppy ears and a tiny blue bow around its neck. I could already imagine our baby holding it, her little fingers curling around its plush trunk. As I approached the hospital doors, a surge of nervous energy hit me. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, but suddenly the reality felt enormous. This wasn't just a baby. This was my daughter, my family. The automatic doors whooshed open, and I was greeted by the usual bustle of a hospital. Visitors carrying flowers, nurses in scrubs hurrying past, and the faint scent of antiseptic in the air. I knew exactly where to go. Clara and I had been here so many times for checkups and ultrasounds. Each step toward the maternity ward felt heavier with excitement and anticipation. When I reached room 304, I wasn't expecting Clara's sister, Vanessa, to be standing outside. She looked off. Her usual bubbly demeanor was gone, replaced by an anxious energy that made me stop in my tracks. "Vanessa," I said, gripping the stuffed elephant tightly. "What are you doing out here?" She glanced at the door, then back at me. "Hey, Ethan. Clara's been through a lot today. Just maybe take a moment before you go in." My stomach tightened. "What's going on? Is Clara okay?" "The baby. They're fine," she said quickly, but her hesitation lingered. "It's just a lot. You should know she's really emotional right now." I nodded, though her words didn't sit right with me. Something about her tone felt off, but I didn't have time to think about it. My wife and daughter were waiting for me. Without another word, I pushed open the door. And there she was, Clara, sitting up in bed, her chestnut hair pulled back, her face glowing with exhaustion and something that looked like relief. She held a small bundle of blankets in her arms, and for a moment, the world stood still. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft and tired. "Come meet her." I stepped closer, my heart pounding as I leaned in to see my baby girl. She was perfect, tiny, with delicate features and a head full of dark curls. My daughter. Except, my mind stumbled over the detail as I stared. The curls were impossibly dark, the skin a rich, warm brown. I froze. My fingers tightened on the elephant in my hand. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain what?" My voice came out quieter than I expected, but it was sharp enough to cut through the tension building in the room. I took a step back, shaking my head. "What's going on here, Clara?" Clara's face crumpled as tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan, please," she started, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. My eyes flicked to the baby again, those soft curls, that deep, beautiful skin, and I knew. The truth was staring me in the face. Undeniable and devastating. "Explain what, Clara?" My voice was low, strained. Explain why my daughter doesn't look anything like me? She clutched the baby closer to her chest, as if shielding her from my words. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she whispered. I felt my stomach drop. This way? What way? Clara, what are you saying? Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she broke under the weight of it. I made a mistake, she sobbed. A terrible mistake. I slept with someone else. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, gripping the back of the chair for support. You what? I managed, the betrayal sinking in like a blade. When? She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. It was months ago. Just a few times. It didn't mean anything, Ethan. I was scared, and we were fighting, and that's your excuse? My voice rose, raw with emotion. You were scared, so you decided to cheat? While we were trying to have a baby? It wasn't like that, she cried, her voice cracking. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. I stared at her, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. But you did, I said, each word heavy with anger and disbelief. You didn't just hurt me, Clara. You lied to me. You let me believe this was my child. I didn't know for sure, she pleaded. I thought maybe there was a chance she could be yours. I couldn't listen anymore. The stuffed elephant slipped from my hand, landing on the floor with a soft thud. You thought, I echoed bitterly. You thought you could just gamble on this and I'd never find out? That I just what? Raise another man's child without knowing. It's not like that, she said again, weaker this time. Ethan, please. I love you. We can get through this. I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Get through this? Clara, you didn't just cheat on me. You tried to trick me into believing this baby was mine. You were going to let me love her, raise her, and live a lie. She said nothing, her tears falling silently now. I looked at her, at the baby, at the life I thought I'd been walking into when I came through that door. It was all gone, shattered in an instant. I turned and walked out, my heart breaking with every step. The hallway outside Clara's hospital room felt cold, sterile, and suffocating. My steps echoed against the polished floor as I walked, my mind spinning with every revelation that had just been dumped on me. I passed Vanessa on my way out. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. Don't, I said sharply, barely looking at her. Not now. I didn't stop moving until I was outside, where the crisp autumn air hit me like a slap. For a moment, I stood frozen on the hospital steps, trying to catch my breath. The stuffed elephant was still back in Clara's room, lying on the floor. The thought hit me like a cruel punchline. That elephant was meant for my child, for a life that didn't exist. I made it to my car, climbed in, and slammed the door shut. The silence was deafening. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I stared straight ahead, my vision blurring with tears that I refused to let fall. I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. The woman I had loved, the woman I trusted, had built this perfect lie, hoping I'd be too blind or too willing to see through it. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was Clara. Again. I ignored it, just like I'd ignored the last 3 calls. Then came a text. Ethan, please come back. We need to talk. For us. For her. Her. The baby. My stomach twisted as I read the words. That baby, beautiful and innocent as she was, wasn't mine. She never had been. And Clara had known it was a possibility all along. I sat there for a while, letting the weight of it all settle over me. Then I made a decision. Clara wasn't getting away with this. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any sense. She didn't just betray me. She tried to trap me in a life built on lies. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't thought about in years. Linda Harper, a family law attorney I'd met through a client at work. I hit the call button and waited as it rang. Linda Harper speaking, came the crisp, professional voice on the other end. Linda, I said, my voice tight. This is Ethan Monroe. I need your help. Linda Harper's office was stark and professional, with shelves of neatly arranged legal books and framed diplomas on the walls. It had been less than 24 hours since I walked out of the hospital, and now I was sitting across from her, explaining the mess my life had become. So let me get this straight, Linda said, her pen poised over a legal pad. Your wife admitted to an affair, and the child she just gave birth to is likely not yours. She wanted you to sign the birth certificate despite this? I nodded, my jaw tight. She didn't just want me to sign it. She was counting on it. She thought she could guilt me into being the father. When I refused, she broke down and started saying we could work through it, like this was just some little mistake. Linda scribbled a few notes, then looked up at me, her expression sharp. Did you sign anything at the hospital? No, I said firmly. Not a thing. Good, she replied. That's the first smart move. Legally, as it stands, you're not the father, and you're under no obligation to assume responsibility. But we'll need proof to make sure this doesn't come back to bite you later. What kind of proof? I asked. A DNA test, she said. We'll get the baby tested and have the results officially documented. Once we have that, we'll make sure she can't legally list you as the father, no matter what she tries. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling heavily. What about the affair? The lies? The fact that she was planning this for months? Linda nodded. We'll address that too. If we can prove she acted with intent to deceive, especially if she tried to involve you financially, it strengthens your case in a divorce and any fraud charges we might pursue. The word divorce hung in the air between us. I knew it was the logical next step, but hearing it out loud made it real. 5 years of marriage, countless memories and plans for a future together, gone just like that. What's the next step? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Linda closed her notebook and met my eyes. Start documenting everything. Every text, every call, every interaction with her or anyone involved. Don't delete anything, no matter how small it seems. We'll file for the DNA test immediately, and from there, I'll guide you through the legal process. I stood to leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I had someone in my corner who knew how to navigate this mess. Dread because the mess wasn't going away anytime soon. As I walked out of Linda's office, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text from Clara. Ethan, please. Let's talk. Don't do anything rash. I love you. I stared at the message for a long moment before tucking my phone back into my pocket. Talking wouldn't fix this. Love didn't mean a damn thing when it was built on lies. Days passed in a blur of meetings with Linda, gathering documents, and rereading the texts and emails Clara had sent me since that day in the hospital. Each one felt like a manipulation, carefully crafted to make me feel guilty for walking away. I hadn't responded to a single one. Every plea, every apology, every attempt to draw me back in, I forwarded them all to Linda. They're trying to manipulate you, she'd said after reading them. It's classic, but we're building a case. Stay strong. What struck me most was the lack of remorse in Claire's words. There were no real apologies, just excuses. It was always about her. How scared she was, how she thought this could work, how she wanted to preserve our marriage. Not once did she acknowledge what she'd done to me. The DNA test was arranged quickly. Clara had no choice but to comply, thanks to the legal paperwork Linda filed. A week later, I sat in her office again, staring at the results. 0% probability of paternity, Linda said, sliding the paper across the desk to me. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hard. It's definitive. The baby isn't yours. I let out a slow breath, my chest tightening as I read the words. I'd known this was coming, had seen it in the baby's face the moment I walked into that hospital room, but having it in black and white made it feel like the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. What do we do now? I asked. Linda leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. We'll file this with the court as part of your divorce proceedings. It also prevents Clara from legally naming you as the father on the birth certificate. And if she tries? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Then we pursue fraud charges, Linda said matter-of-factly. Attempting to falsify legal documents, especially after being presented with DNA evidence, is a serious offense. That word again, fraud. It made everything feel so cold, so calculated. But that's exactly what this was. Clara hadn't just cheated on me. She planned to tie me to a child that wasn't mine, knowing the truth and hoping I'd never find out. The next day, Linda called me with an update. You need to know, Clara already tried to file the birth certificate, she said, her voice clipped. What? I said, gripping the phone. She knows the DNA results. She knows I'm not the father. She does, Linda confirmed. But she filed it anyway. With your name? My blood boiled. She can't do that. She can't, and she won't get away with it, Linda assured me. I've already filed a fraud complaint with the hospital and the state. We'll use this as further evidence of her intent to deceive. It strengthens your case. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window in my apartment. I hadn't been back to the house since leaving the hospital, and I didn't plan to. The memories of Clara, of what I thought we had, were too much. The truth was out now, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, its dark wood paneling and rows of benches, creating an atmosphere that felt both formal and stifling. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Linda by my side, her sharp gaze fixed on the opposing counsel's desk where Clara sat with her lawyer. Clara looked worn, her usually polished appearance replaced by a simple navy dress and hair tied back into a plain bun. She avoided my gaze, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. The sight stirred something in me, a flicker of the woman I used to love, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her lies. All rise, the bailiff announced as the judge entered. Judge Amanda Rice, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of authority, took her seat behind the bench. After we were all seated, she wasted no time diving into the matter. This court is here today to address the case of Monroe versus Monroe, specifically allegations of attempted paternity fraud and the dissolution of marriage. Mr. Monroe, as the plaintiff, you may proceed with your case. Linda rose, her every movement deliberate. Your Honor, this is a case of deliberate deception. The evidence will show that Mrs. Monroe knowingly engaged in an extramarital affair, became pregnant as a result, and attempted to deceive my client into believing the child was his. Even after being presented with DNA evidence proving he was not the father, Mrs. Monroe filed a birth certificate naming him as such. Linda turned slightly, gesturing to me. My client came to the hospital that day ready to meet his child, only to discover a web of lies that had been carefully constructed over months. He seeks not only the dissolution of their marriage, but also protection from any further fraudulent attempts to tie him to a child that is not his. Judge Rice nodded, her expression unreadable. Proceed. When Linda called me to the stand, I stood, my heart pounding as I walked to the witness box. The bailiff had me swear to tell the truth, and then I sat down, my hands gripping the armrests of the wooden chair. Mr. Monroe, Linda began, her voice steady. Can you tell the court what happened on the day your wife gave birth? I recounted the events, the text message that filled me with joy, the drive to the hospital, the moment I walked into the room and saw the baby. My voice faltered slightly as I described realizing that the child wasn't mine, but I pushed through. Every detail mattered. And what happened when you confronted your wife? Linda asked. She admitted to having an affair, I said, my voice hardening. She said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But then she tried to convince me to sign the birth certificate anyway. And did you? Linda asked. No, I said firmly. I refused. Linda walked over to the table and held up a document. Your Honor, this is a copy of the DNA test results conducted at my client's request. It confirms with 100% certainty that Mr. Monroe is not the biological father of the child in question. The judge accepted the document, her gaze flicking between me and Clara. Noted, Linda continued. Mr. Monroe, were you aware that, despite these results, your wife attempted to file a birth certificate naming you as the father? I nodded, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. I found out later, through my lawyer. It was a deliberate attempt to tie me to a child that isn't mine. When Linda finished questioning me, Clara's lawyer, a polished woman named Victoria Lang, stood for cross-examination. Mr. Monroe, she began, her voice smooth, isn't it true that you and your wife had been trying to conceive for some time? Yes, I admitted, we were. And during that time, your wife experienced a great deal of emotional distress related to the difficulties of conception, correct? She did, I said, my jaw tightening. Victoria took a step closer, her tone softening. Is it possible, then, that her actions were the result of fear and desperation? That she made poor choices under immense emotional pressure? I met her gaze steadily. Poor choices don't involve months of lying. Poor choices don't involve planning to deceive someone into raising a child that isn't theirs. This wasn't fear. This was calculated. Victoria's composure faltered slightly, but she recovered. Thank you, Mr. Monroe. No further questions. As I stepped down from the stand, I caught Clara's gaze for the briefest moment. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. When Clara took the stand, I forced myself to remain calm, even though every fiber of my being wanted to yell, to demand answers she'd never given me. She swore to tell the truth, though the irony of that nearly made me scoff. Her lawyer, Victoria, approached the stand with a sympathetic air. Mrs. Monroe, please tell the court your version of events. Clara took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. Ethan and I had been trying to have a baby for years, she began, her voice trembling. It was so hard. Every month, more disappointment. I felt like a failure, like I couldn't give him the family we both wanted. Her voice cracked, and Victoria placed a reassuring hand on the edge of the stand. Go on, Clara. Clara wiped her eyes and continued. Last year, during a business trip, I met Julian. I was lonely, and Ethan and I had been arguing a lot about everything. I made a terrible mistake. It was a few times, and I ended it as soon as I realized it was wrong. But you became pregnant, Victoria prompted. Yes, Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know who the father was, and I prayed, it was Ethan. I didn't want to destroy our marriage. Did you intend to deceive your husband? Victoria asked. No, Clara said quickly, her eyes wide with desperation. I was scared and confused. When the baby was born and I realized, she paused, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to do. I thought if Ethan bonded with her, if he saw how much we needed him, we could get through it. Victoria nodded sympathetically. And why did you file the birth certificate with Mr. Monroe's name after the DNA test? Clara's head dropped, and she stared at her hands. The hospital was pressuring me. They needed the paperwork, and Julian wasn't answering my calls. I thought Ethan might forgive me if we had time. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client's actions, while misguided, were not malicious. She acted out of fear and desperation, trying to save her family. We asked for understanding, not punishment. Linda stood for cross-examination, her expression cold. Mrs. Monroe, you claim you were trying to save your marriage. Does this email from March, written to Julian, sound like a plea for forgiveness? She picked up a sheet of paper and began reading. We need to be careful. Ethan can't find out. Once the birth certificate is signed, it'll be easier. Clara's face turned white. I was scared. Scared, Linda said sharply. Not remorseful. Not honest. Just scared you'd get caught. And when you did, you doubled down, filing a fraudulent birth certificate despite knowing the DNA results. Is that correct? I didn't mean to. Answer the question, Linda interrupted, her voice icy. Did you knowingly file a birth certificate naming Mr. Monroe as the father after the DNA test proved otherwise? Clara hesitated, her voice shaking. Yes. Linda turned to the judge. No further questions? As Clara stepped down, her shoulders slumped. I felt no pity. Her every word had been a carefully constructed excuse, a way to deflect blame. But the evidence spoke louder than her pleas. The courtroom was silent as Judge Rice reviewed the evidence and testimony, her expression unreadable. Clara sat at her table, her head bowed, while Linda leaned toward me, her voice low and steady. This is where it all comes together, she said. Stay composed no matter what happens. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Everything, the DNA test, the emails, the months of lies had been laid bare. Now it was up to the judge. Finally, Judge Rice set down the papers in front of her and adjusted her glasses. She looked at Clara first, her gaze stern. Mrs. Monroe, she began, her voice calm but firm, your actions in this case are deeply troubling. You knowingly engaged in an affair, became pregnant as a result, and attempted to deceive your husband into believing the child was his. Clara flinched, her hands trembling in her lap. This was not a single moment of poor judgment, Judge Rice continued. The evidence presented shows a pattern of deliberate deceit, including your attempt to file a fraudulent birth certificate even after DNA results confirmed Mr. Monroe was not the father. She turned her gaze to me. Mr. Monroe, the court recognizes the significant emotional harm caused by your wife's actions. You have presented clear evidence supporting your claims, and the court commends you for the restraint and clarity with which you have pursued this case. Judge Rice straightened in her seat. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Monroe. The DNA results conclusively prove non-paternity, and the fraudulent birth certificate filing further substantiates his claims. As such, 1. The marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Monroe is hereby dissolved. 2. Mrs. Monroe is fined $5,000 for her attempted fraud and ordered to complete 100 hours of community service. 3. Mr. Monroe is legally absolved of all parental rights and responsibilities regarding the child in question. Furthermore, the judge added, Mrs. Monroe is warned that any further attempts to involve Mr. Monroe in the child's life under false pretenses may result in additional legal penalties. She struck her gavel, the sharp sound ringing through the room. This court is adjourned. Clara slumped forward, her face buried in her hands, as her lawyer leaned in to whisper something to her. I didn't wait to find out what. I stood, shaking Linda's hand firmly. You did everything right, she said with a small smile. This is over now. As I turned to leave, I caught one last glance at Clara. For a moment, I thought she might look at me, might try to plead one last time. But she didn't. She sat motionless, defeated, as I walked out of the courtroom and into the crisp autumn air. The courthouse steps felt lighter as I descended, leaving the weight of the trial and the betrayal behind me. Linda and I parted ways with a handshake, her reassurance echoing in my mind. This isn't just a win in court, Ethan. It's a fresh start. Over the next few months, I leaned into rebuilding my life. The house, once filled with memories of Clara, was sold. I moved into a sleek apartment downtown, where the views of the Chicago skyline became a daily reminder of forward momentum. Work consumed my days, and the promotion I'd been vying for finally came through. Tom, ever the loyal friend, made sure I didn't wallow. Weekly golf games and dinners out became the new routine. Slowly, laughter returned to my life. Not the hollow kind I'd forced during those dark months, but genuine moments of joy. One evening, as I sorted through the last box of old belongings, I came across a photo from our wedding. Clara and I, smiling, oblivious to the future that awaited. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I tore the photo in half, discarding it without a second thought. Months later, at a client dinner arranged by Tom, I met Sarah, a colleague from the accounting department. She was witty, sharp, and refreshingly straightforward. Over the course of the evening, her laughter drew me in, though I kept my guard up. I've heard you're a genius with design, she teased over dessert. And I've heard you're a terror with expense reports, I shot back, earning a laugh. As we said our goodbyes, she gave me a soft smile. Maybe we'll cross paths again. Maybe, I replied, feeling the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Weeks after the trial, I received an unexpected text from an unknown number. Ethan, I heard about your promotion. I'm sorry for everything. The baby's doing well. I still wish things had been different. It was Clara. I stared at the message, unmoved. The man I was before might have felt pity, might have considered responding. But not anymore. I deleted the text without a second thought. My journey wasn't about her anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about building something honest and strong. As I stood at the window of my apartment that evening, watching the city lights shimmer, I felt a sense of peace. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. Betrayal had left its mark, but it had also taught me something invaluable: resilience. The future stretched out before me, unburdened by lies. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it, one step at a time.